Welcome to the Feminist Park podcast. I'm Kwame.
And I'm Leilani. It's great to be kicking off this journey with you all today.
Yeah, we're diving into work that's really closely tied to the vision behind the Feminist Park project.
Imagining these truly equitable public spaces, starting with the idea for an intersectional feminist park right here in Berlin.
Exactly. And this podcast, well, it's kind of an extension of that. We're going to be digging into the academic research that, supports and informs that kind of vision.
We'll be taking these dense, sometimes quite academic papers and really pulling out the core and insights.
And looking at them through specific lenses, things like environmental justice, intersectionality, anti-colonial thought, queer theory.
All the stuff that helps us think critically about space. So I want you to picture the sidewalk just outside your front door. Or, the transit stop you use to get to work. Or maybe that public square downtown where you sometimes sit and eat lunch. Have you ever stopped, really stopped, and wondered exactly who those spaces were built for?
Oh, that is such a massive question to start with.
Right, and I don't mean the construction crews who poured the concrete or the politicians whose names are on the bronze plaques. I mean the imaginary user living in the minds of the urban planners who drafted the blueprint.
The default citizen, yeah.
Exactly. Because mostly when we walk out into the world, we just accept the city as a given. I mean, the roads run where they run, the bus comes when the schedule says it comes, the streetlights illuminate what they illuminate. It feels like a natural landscape.
Almost like navigating a mountain pass or a riverbed.
Yeah. But it is entirely artificial. Every single curb height, every transit route, every placement of a bench is the result of a deliberate decision. And today on this deep dive, we are asking a simple but deeply profound question. What if those foundational decisions were made with the completely different set of human priorities?
It is a question that, frankly, completely rewrites your understanding of the built environment once you start pulling at the threads.
Oh, absolutely.
Because we have this tendency to assume neutrality in our concrete and our asphalt. We think infrastructure is just math and engineering. X amount of cars need to move from point A to point B.
Just pure logistics.
Right. But urban space is anything but neutral. It has a memory, it has a political agenda, and it has a profound bias. The physical layout of a city dictates who is allowed to move freely, who is forced to struggle, and crucially, whose labor is considered valuable.
And uncovering that exact bias is our mission today. We are embarking on a massive journey to decode the DNA of our urban spaces. We are going to deconstruct the city as you and I know it, and then, piece by physical piece, we are going to unpack this concept known as the feminist park.
It's such a fascinating concept.
It really is. We are going to extract the design principles, the social goals, the historical context from a mountain of really incredible academic research to figure out how we can actually design our physical spaces for human liberation.
And to figure this out, we are digging through a stack of research from an Italian urban planning journal. It's called del Territorial.
Yeah.
And a group of scholars essentially mapped out the invisible biases in our concrete. We are specifically looking at one of their issues titled Gender and Project of Places. And what makes this volume so compelling is that it doesn't just offer, abstract theory.
Which is so refreshing.
Right. It pulls together intense intersectional case studies from across the globe. It challenges us to look at the built environment not as this passive backdrop to our daily lives, but as an active participant in shaping our social realities.
Okay, so to really grasp what this research is trying to tell us, I think we have to look at how we are usually taught to imagine city planning. Like if you've ever played a simulation game like SimCity.
Oh, I spent hours on that game.
Right. Everyone knows the vibe. You take this top-down, godlike view of the terrain. You're hovering thousands of feet in the air, dragging your cursor to lay down a perfect grid of roads.
Yeah, painting the map.
Exactly.
Right.
You zone a square green for residential, you zone a square blue for commercial, and you drop a big yellow block way out on the edge of the map for industrial. And your entire metric for success is efficiency. You want traffic to flow, you want capital to generate, and you want the gears of the city machine to just turn smoothly.
It is highly abstract and deeply mathematical. But that godlike view treats the actual citizens as nothing more than tiny data points feeding an algorithm. And the crazy part is, historically, that is exactly how modern cities were planned.
Wow.
Yeah. The feminist approach to urban planning that this journal outlines is the absolute antithesis of that bird's eye view. Instead of hovering above the map, this approach forces you to drop right down onto the pavement. like a VR headset.
Oh, I love that analogy. Putting on the VR headset and actually standing on the street corner.
Exactly. Suddenly, you aren't looking at abstract traffic flow algorithms. You are feeling the uneven pavement under your feet. You are noticing whether the streetlights actually illuminate the corner where you have to wait for the bus.
You're prioritizing the human body's actually navigating the space.
Yes, the relationships, the ethics of care, and the physical limitations of the people who live there every single day.
So we're taking the focus off the commercial zones and the industrial zones, and we're looking at the network of actual human survival.
And that shift in perspective addresses a deeply ingrained historical division that dictates how our cities function. The traditional Western city, going all the way back to antiquity, is built on a very strict spatial separation.
Okay.
You have the public sphere, what the ancient Greeks called the polis. This is the space for political interaction, for commerce, philosophical debate, decision-making.
Public square.
Right. And historically, the polis was the exclusive, fiercely protected domain of men. Then, physically separated from that, you have the private sphere, the oikos.
The household.
Exactly. The space of family management, of daily reproduction, of the actual literal labor of keeping human beings alive. And this was the assigned, hidden domain of women.
So the inside versus the outside, the visible versus the invisible.
The editors of the journal argue that breaking down that exact wall between the polis and the oikos is the mandatory first step to building a truly inclusive city. For centuries, care work has been hidden away behind closed doors, treated as a private domestic burden.
Out of sight, out of mind.
Right. But the feminist approach demands that we bring the concept of care out into the public square. It argues that the infrastructure of care is just as vital to a functioning city as the infrastructure of transportation or electrical grids or plumbing.
Which brings us back to my first question. If the traditional city was designed with that strict division in mind, with care hidden away in the house, who was the outside world actually built for?
Well, the research points to a very specific historical archetype.
Okay, let's unpack that.
There's this fascinating piece of research in the journal that breaks down the concept of the universal citizen. This is the imaginary person that urban planners have historically designed the public sphere to serve. And in literature and urban theory, this figure is best represented by the flaneur.
The flaneur. It sounds like a character from a 19th century French novel.
That is exactly where the concept originates. The flaneur is the classic figure of the gentleman stroller, famously analyzed by writers like Charles Baudelaire. He is a man of leisure, usually wealthy, who wanders the city streets. He observes the urban movement, the crowds, the new glass arcades, but he does so from an external, detached, almost voyeuristic position.
Interesting. So he's in the city, but not really part of the struggle of the city?
Right. He is moving through it, but he is not bound by it. He has this social and economic privilege to experience the urban environment purely as an aesthetic playground.
Right.
And the research points out a chilling reality. This figure, this detached, autonomous, able-bodied male observer, implicitly became the default perspective for modern urban planning. The city was literally designed to facilitate his movement, his commerce, and his leisurely observation.
I mean, hear you describe that, I can't help but think about how completely alien that experience is to the way most people actually live.
Oh, complete.
Because if the city was built for this detached, poetic stroller, that implies a city built without friction. But if you are, say, a parent rushing to drop off a toddler at daycare, then sprinting to catch a train to get to your job, and then trying to buy heavy groceries on the way home, you don't have the time or the energy to be a detached observer.
No, you definitely don't.
You aren't strolling. You are surviving a hostile obstacle course. You are hyper-aware of every broken curb, every delayed train, every missing crosswalk.
That friction you are describing is the visceral reality of navigating an environment not built for your needs. The researchers argue that the female experience of the city, what feminist theorists might call the gaze of the flaneurs, is fundamentally opposite to the flaneur.
Because of the historical gender roles assigning care work to women.
Exactly. Their experience in the public sphere is not characterized by detached observation. It is characterized by a gaze that is immersed, that unveils, and that empathizes. It is profoundly relational.
Because historically, women have been tasked with the physical, exhausting labor of care.
Right. Women experience the city holistically, in tangible terms of life, vulnerable bodies, daily commitments, and physical survival. You cannot be a detached voyeur when you are trying to navigate a stroller onto a crowded bus.
Right. Or when you're calculating the safest, best lit route to walk home after a late shift at a hospital.
Yes. The female gaze on the city is grounded in the reality of social reproduction.
Okay, let's pause on that term, social reproduction, because it sounds very academic, but it describes the most fundamental reality of our daily lives.
It really does.
We aren't just talking about, giving birth. We're
Mhm.
talking about the massive, invisible engine of labor that keeps the workforce functioning.
Yes, all the background work.
It's the mental load of the grocery list, the physical labor of doing the laundry, the emotional labor of soothing a child, the logistics of caring for an elderly parent. It is all the unpaid or underpaid work that has to happen every single day just so a human being can wake up the next morning and go participate in the formal economy.
And historically, urban planning has treated that massive engine of labor as completely invisible. But the journal gives us a perfect historical example of someone who shattered that paradigm, someone who completely revolutionized how we look at the mechanics of the city by applying that immersed relational gaze.
Are we talking about Jane Jacobs?
We are talking about Jane Jacobs. She is highlighted in the research as the ultimate flooz.
Oh, that makes so much sense.
Right. Jacobs lived in New York in the mid-20th century, which was an era dominated by top-down SimCity-style planners like Robert Moses.
Right. Robert Moses was infamous for that.
He literally looked at abstract maps and decided to bulldoze vibrant, low-income neighborhoods to build massive, efficient concrete expressways. He wanted to move cars, to move capital.
But Jacobs fought back.
She did. She understood the city not through abstract mathematical deductions, but through walking the pavement. She famously observed what she called the ballet of the sidewalk.
I love that phrase. And that wasn't just a poetic phrase for her, was it? It was a mechanical observation of how a neighborhood actually survives.
Exactly. It was the opposite of abstract theory. She documented the intricate, overlapping routines of daily life. She noted how shopkeepers sweeping their stoops kept an eye on children playing, providing informal childcare and safety.
Yeah, the eyes on the street.
Yes. She saw how the intermingling of uses apartments above grocery stores next to shoe repair shops created a constant flow of foot traffic at different times of the day, which naturally deterred crime. She saw the city as a living, breathing, relational organism, not a machine to be optimized for the automobile.
So she was looking at the network of care, while the planners were only looking at the network of asphalt.
And her legacy is the foundation for this entire volume of the journal we're discussing. The core argument that emerges is that urban spaces are actively hostile to care. There is a powerful quote in the editorial citing the feminist scholar Jean Dark. She wrote, "Our cities are the inscription in stone, brick, glass, and concrete of patriarchy."
Wow. The inscription in stone, brick, glass, and concrete of patriarchy. That is haunting.
It really hits you.
It makes you realize that biases aren't just invisible attitudes or discriminatory laws written on paper. They are physically poured into the foundations of our buildings. They are the actual physical barriers we are forced to walk around every day.
It means that if we want to design a feminist park or a truly inclusive city, we cannot just add a few more park benches or paint a crosswalk a different color.
Right, it's not about window dressing.
No, it requires a complete paradigm shift. We have to fundamentally change how municipal governments value care and social reproduction in the public sphere. We have to design spaces that actively facilitate relationships and community support rather than isolating people into neat, efficient, productive little silos.
But to actually design the ultimate feminist park, we can't just operate on high-level theory. We need to look at the exact mechanics of how the current city is failing, and we need to look at it through multiple intersectional lenses. Because the friction I mentioned earlier, it isn't the same for everyone. A wealthy, able-bodied woman working a corporate job experiences the city's failures very differently than a working-class migrant woman employed in domestic care. So let's dive into the case studies from the text to unpack these failures mechanically, starting with the realities of race, migration, and class.
To explore this, the journal takes us to a brilliant study in Brussels. The researchers do an incredible job of unpacking the spatial reality of migrant women working in the care sector in Belgium. They argue that these women face a severe double disadvantage in the labor market.
Okay, let's unpack the mechanics of that double disadvantage.
First, they are disadvantaged as migrants. This includes systemic language barriers, the total lack of state recognition for their home country educational qualifications, and pervasive racism. Second, they are disadvantaged as women, who are disproportionately pushed into precarious, low-paying care work roles like domestic cleaning, elderly care, childcare. And of course, they are performing this formal care work for others, while simultaneously being expected to manage the unpaid care work in their own households.
The social reproduction never stops.
Exactly.
What makes this study so groundbreaking to me is that it maps exactly what that double disadvantage looks like on a physical map. The researchers focused on a district in Brussels called Uccle, and they created what they call paths of care.
Yes.
They didn't just look at survey data. They physically tracked the daily commutes of these female migrant care workers. They introduced us to a woman named Grace who moved to Belgium from the Philippines. And the details of her daily commute are just staggering.
They really are. Grace lives in Uccle, but she works in two entirely different municipalities on the outskirts of the city. To get to work, she faces a transit journey that routinely takes more than 2 hours each way.
4 hours a day just sitting in transit.
And this isn't a comfortable, uninterrupted ride on a high-speed bullet train.
No. She wakes up at 6 a.m. and has to string together this fragmented nightmare of multiple buses, the metro, and trams. But here is the detail that really illustrates that inscription in concrete we were talking about. Grace has to walk 20 minutes from the final bus stop to her employer's house.
Yeah.
And she is walking in the pitch black of early morning, often on unpaved suburban roads that completely lack sidewalks.
And while she is waiting for her various transit connections, she is standing at bus stops that lack basic shelters. She is exposed to freezing cold, rain, snow. She explicitly tells the researchers that she feels deeply afraid waiting alone in the dark because the district lacks proper lighting and pedestrian infrastructure.
So we have to ask why this system is built this way. Let's look at the mechanics of municipal transit routing.
Let's do it.
Traditional transit systems are almost always built on a hub-and-spoke model. They are designed to funnel businessmen, the modern Flanners, from the residential suburbs into the commercial city center at 8:30 a.m. and funnel them back out at 5:30 p.m. But Grace isn't working those hours, and she isn't traveling those routes.
Exactly. Care workers operate on non-standard schedules. They do early morning shift work or late evening work. And crucially, they travel tangentially.
Tangentially meaning?
From suburb to suburb, moving between different residential neighborhoods to care for children or the elderly. The multi-million-dollar infrastructure of the city's transit network was simply not designed to connect one suburb to another. It prioritizes the radial flow of formal capital over the tangential flow of care.
The entire system is completely failing the very people who do the physical labor to keep the city functioning. It actively steals 4 hours of Grace's daytime she desperately needs to rest or to care for her own family.
Yeah.
The architecture of the transit system is a form of temporal theft.
Temporal theft. That's exactly what it is. The authors conclude that the city's mobility network actively penalizes care workers. And this systemic exclusion connects deeply to another piece of research in the volume, which looks at Roma camps in Naples.
Oh, right. Moving from transit routing in Brussels to housing architecture in Naples, how do the mechanics of exclusion operate there?
The researcher contrasts two very different types of spatial settlements to show how top-down planning often deliberately marginalizes vulnerable bodies. On one hand, you have the formal, state-sanctioned housing projects known as the Villages of Solidarity.
Despite the welcoming name.
Exactly. Because despite the name, the research reveals these are essentially exclusionary control devices. They are formal camps designed by the state, but they are architecturally sterile, heavily surveilled, and completely disconnected from the broader urban fabric of Naples. They physically isolate the Roma population.
They treat the residents as a problem to be contained, rather than citizens to be integrated.
Precisely. And the opposite approach is found in the informal settlements. These are unauthorized camps built from the ground up by the people actually living there.
Okay.
Now, the research is clear that these informal settlements suffer from massive, unacceptable deficits regarding basic hygienic services and safety. However, because they are built by the community, they generate alternative rule systems and organic social networks. The architecture adapts to the actual relational needs of the people.
Right. So the formal planning assumes a universal compliant subject, while the informal settlement, out of sheer necessity, builds a network of mutual survival.
Yes. The overarching lesson from both Brussels and Naples is that formal, top-down urban planning often deliberately excludes the most marginalized bodies, turning them into spaces out of place. Whether it's a bus route that ignores suburban care workers or a housing project built like an open-air prison, the city treats people who don't fit the universal citizen mold as invisible.
That brings us to another critical layer of this intersectional analysis. If the transit system is a hostile obstacle course for an able-bodied worker like Grace, who at least has the physical endurance to walk 20 minutes in the dark, What happens to those who literally do not have that physical endurance? Let's look at the city through the lens of ableism and disability justice.
Right. For disabled individuals or the elderly, the built environment becomes an almost insurmountable barrier. The Brussels study introduces us to another resident who perfectly illustrates this mechanical failure.
Fina.
Yes, Fina. She is a 70-year-old woman living in Brussels. For Fina, the crisis isn't the 2-hour duration of the commute. The crisis is the physical act of getting her body onto the vehicle. She struggles profoundly simply to enter the tram because many of the older trams on the Brussels network lack level access platforms. The physical step up from the street to the tram is simply too high.
I really want to focus on that detail. A 6-inch piece of metal, the height of a step, completely dictates her freedom to move through her own city. It determines whether she can buy groceries, see a doctor, or visit a friend. That is what we mean by biases inscribed in concrete and steel.
And the researchers highlight that the barriers go far beyond the vehicles themselves. We talked about Grace freezing at the bus stop. The study points out how weather events, combined with municipal priorities, act as massive access barriers.
Reading the source material, the discussion on snow removal was an absolute light bulb moment for me.
It's so revealing, isn't it?
It really is. Think about it. When a massive snowstorm hits a major city, what is the very first thing the municipal government plows?
The roads. The streets for the cars are cleared almost immediately.
And the sidewalks. They're frequently left entirely untouched. Or, even worse, the plows actively push the massive snowdrifts from the street directly onto the sidewalks and into the pedestrian crosswalks.
Right. And we have to ask why municipal budgets operate this way. The city prioritizes clearing the road because the road represents formal commerce. It represents the commuter driving to the office, the delivery truck moving goods.
Capital in motion.
Exactly. The sidewalk, on the other hand, represents pedestrians. And in the eyes of traditional urban planning, pedestrians are often engaged in unpaid care work. Pushing a stroller, walking a child to school, an elderly person going to a local shop.
So the modern flanner driving his SUV to the corporate office is perfectly accommodated. But if you are Fina relying on a walker, or if you are a wheelchair user, the city's decision to prioritize the road over the sidewalk has essentially trapped you inside your house.
You are functionally under house arrest.
Under house arrest because of a municipal budgeting priority. The lack of weather protection at stops, the prioritizing of cars over pedestrians, the height of a tram step. These aren't just inconveniences, they're an infrastructure of isolation.
And recognizing the mechanics of that isolation is the necessary precursor to dismantling it. Which brings us to a concept that completely re-envisions how we handle care. We have seen the systemic failures, the physical exhaustion of Grace, the isolation of Fina, the marginalization in Naples. So how do we begin to solve these cascading crises of care?
Right. What's the solution?
The research in this volume points toward a radical spatial practice called commoning.
Commoning. Let's really drill down into that term because it is the ideological engine of the feminist park. When most people hear the word commons, they picture, I don't know, a grassy field in the middle of a 17th century colonial village where everyone lets their sheep graze. But what does commoning mean as an active verb in a modern, dense urban context?
In this context, commoning is the deliberate political process of moving the labor of care out of the private, isolated domestic sphere and transforming it into a public shared community asset. The journal features extensive research on this. Scholars analyze spaces like the LGBTQIA+ Center in Prato, and the I Morticelli space in Salerno, and the Luce e Siesta space in Rome. These are all physical locations where marginalized groups, women escaping domestic violence, queer individuals seeking safety and community have physically occupied abandoned or unused urban spaces and transformed them into collective resources.
The best way I can conceptualize this is by looking at software
Oh,
development.
I like this. Go on.
In the traditional patriarchal city, care work is treated like proprietary software. One person, and statistically almost always a woman, is expected to code the entire operating system of a family's daily survival entirely in secret, in the basement, completely on her own.
Yes.
She has to manage the schedules, the meals, the emotional crises, the doctor's appointments. It is exhausting, it is deeply isolating, and if she crashes, the entire family system crashes.
A single point of failure.
Exactly. But commoning is like taking that proprietary code and uploading it to an open source platform like GitHub. The community comes together in a public space to build it together. You share the labor, you debug the problems collectively, and everyone shares in the benefits of the finished, robust product. Care becomes a shared public infrastructure, not a crushing private burden.
That analogy perfectly captures the mechanical shift, and that is exactly what these collective spaces achieve on a physical level. Lucha y Siesta in Rome, for example, is not merely a shelter for women. It operates as a vibrant political laboratory where the ethics of care are enacted collectively.
Wow.
By physically reclaiming an abandoned building, they deliberately blur the boundaries between the private and the public. They provide mutual aid, shared childcare, legal support networks, and cultural programming, all in one physical location.
They are making the invisible work of care hypervisible.
And by doing so, they are asserting their right to exist, to take up space, and to thrive in the urban landscape on their own terms.
So we have built the theoretical foundation. We understand the historical bias of the flaneur and the polis. We've looked through the lenses of migration, disability, and collective action. We understand how the current city mechanically fails to support care, and we've seen the power of open-source commenting.
We've covered a lot.
We really have. But now we're finally ready to look at a real-world blueprint. We are going to examine a physical space that successfully integrated all these intersectional needs into the actual concrete of the city. We are going to look at a true feminist park.
To see this in action, the research takes us to South America, specifically to Montevideo, the capital of Uruguay. We are looking at a space called Plaza Las Pioneras.
Okay.
Inaugurated in March 2020, it is widely studied and celebrated as a rare, tangible, living example of a feminist urban space and a true urban commons.
The political history of how this plaza came to exist is just a masterclass in how you actually force a city to change its priorities. Because you don't get a feminist park, because a city planner wakes up one morning and feels generous.
Right, nobody just hands you a plaza.
Yeah, exactly. Change requires massive political pressure. And in 2017, Montevideo experienced a seismic political event. 400,000 women took to the streets on International Women's Day.
To put that into perspective, Uruguay has a total population of around 3.4 million people. Having 400,000 people marching in the streets is an astronomical mobilization.
Unbelievable scale.
The research notes that participants described the march as a profound awakening. It was heavily influenced by the momentum of the green bandana feminist wave that was surging in neighboring Argentina, advocating for reproductive rights and fighting against gender-based violence. This massive, undeniable physical presence of women occupying the public sphere created immense political pressure.
It forced the municipal machinery to respond. The municipal government in Montevideo at the time had an urban development director named Silvana Pisano, and Pisano actively listened to this movement. She championed the idea of creating a permanent physical space in the city that publicly recognized the historical contributions of feminist pioneers, while simultaneously serving the immediate, on-the-ground needs of the current movement.
And the specific physical site they chose for this project is deeply symbolic. They selected a sprawling former 19th and 20th century tram depot and bus repair workshop located in a historically industrial neighborhood.
I mean, think about the poetic justice of that spatial reclamation.
Yeah.
They took a massive complex that was literally dedicated to heavy machinery, industrial capitalism, and traditional male-dominated mechanical labor.
Yes.
And they decided to fundamentally rewire its DNA into a space of feminist care, relational organizing, and community support.
But the way they designed it is what makes it revolutionary. The city held an architectural design competition for the plaza.
Okay, wait, I really struggled with this part of the text when I first read it. Because when we picture a public park, we usually picture highly specific, heavily engineered zones. Over here is the playground with the swings for the kids. Over there is the fenced-in basketball court. Here is the paved path where you're supposed to walk, and here are the benches bolted to the ground where you're supposed to sit and look at a statue.
Right, the space tells you what to do.
The physical space aggressively dictates your behavior. But the winning design for Plaza Las Pioneras won by doing the exact opposite of that. They proposed an essentially empty square with no specific equipment, no fixed structures, and no predetermined zones. If they didn't build any infrastructure, isn't that just a vacant lot? How is a lack of infrastructure a feminist victory instead of just a lack of municipal funding?
That is the perfect question because it gets right to the heart of feminist urban theory. The winning architects recognize that dictating behavior through highly structured design is fundamentally a form of patriarchal control.
Oh.
There's a profound concept quoted in this text regarding this deliberate architectural choice. The lack of conditioning is also a form of freedom.
The lack of conditioning is a form of freedom.
In traditional urban planning, spaces are overdetermined. The basketball court can only be a basketball court. The playground can only be a playground. They enforce normative behaviors and divide citizens into rigid categories. By deliberately leaving Plaza Las Pioneras open, unconditioned, and minimalist, the architects removed that top-down control. They empowered the public to collectively appropriate the space based on what they need in any given moment.
It's the open source software analogy in physical form. By not hard-coding the space, it can run whatever program the community needs.
Exactly. One day, that massive open plaza can host a political assembly of thousands of people. The next morning, it can adapt to become a spontaneous childcare cooperative. On the weekend, it can serve as a sprawling community market or simply a place for quiet, safe reflection. The space fluidly adapts to the needs of the vulnerable bodies occupying it, rather than forcing the bodies to adapt to the rigid constraints of the concrete.
But a massive empty plaza still needs to be maintained. A feminist park isn't just about the physical pavement, it's about governance. It's about who holds the keys, who makes the rules, and who holds the power. How do they actually manage this space without falling back into traditional bureaucratic hierarchies?
The governance model is arguably the most radical part of the project. Plaza Las Pioneras includes a large adjacent building, the former administrative offices of the tram depot. The municipal government did something highly unusual and deeply progressive. They did not retain control of that building. Instead, they handed over the day-to-day management of the space to an assembly made up of 6 different feminist collectives.
How does that actually work mechanically? 6 different organizations trying to run one building sounds like it could devolve into chaos.
It operates on a model of horizontal partnership. There is no single boss or overarching hierarchical authority. The collectives formed an administrative assembly that makes decisions through consensus. They manage the space for the common good, negotiating the use of offices, meeting rooms, and resources.
That's incredible.
This horizontal partnership between the municipal government and the grassroots organizations is the physical implementation of commoning. It provides these collectives with the vital infrastructure they desperately need: safe meeting spaces, storage, organizational headquarters right there, fully integrated with the public square.
It validates everything we've been unpacking today. This is the blueprint. Plaza Las Pineras isn't just a park. It is the physical recognition of intersectional needs. It is the real-world implementation of commoning.
Yeah.
It creates a powerful threshold place where the private, often invisible work of organizing and care hybridizes with the highly visible public sphere of the city. It takes that godlike SimCity view, shatters it, and says, we see the network of care, we value it, and here is a massive public space where you actually hold the power.
It is the physical manifestation of moving beyond the flaneur. It is a space designed not for detached, privileged observation, but for engaged, messy, vital collective living. It answers the failures we saw on the transit lines of Brussels and the housing projects of Naples by insisting that public space must be inherently flexible, deeply inclusive, and fundamentally grounded in the ethics of care.
We have covered an immense amount of ground today. We started by unpacking the historical bias of the flaneur and the polis, looking at how traditional cities prioritize the rapid flow of commerce over human connection.
Yeah.
We explored the mechanical realities of social reproduction and saw how top-down design creates a very real, very punishing double disadvantage for migrant care workers like Grace, who lose hours of their lives navigating a transit system that refuses to acknowledge their existence.
And we looked at how municipal budgeting priorities like clearing roads before sidewalks actively isolate the elderly and disabled, trapping people like Fina in their homes.
Right. And then we explored the powerful antidote to that isolation, the act of commoning. We saw how grassroots movements are fighting back by reclaiming physical spaces in Prato, Salerno, and Rome, transforming the private, exhausting burden of care into a shared public strength.
And finally, we saw all of these theories culminate in the concrete reality of Plaza Las Pioneras in Montevideo, where the radical act of not conditioning a space, combined with horizontal governance, allowed true freedom and collective care to flourish.
So what does this mean for you, the listener? I want you to walk out your front door tomorrow and just look around your own neighborhood. Become a critical reader of your own environment.
Yes, observe it differently.
Look at the benches in your local park. Are they facing each other to encourage conversation and relationship? Or are they lined up facing away from each other to enforce isolation? Is the path paved smoothly for the pedestrian pushing a stroller? Or is the entire landscape subordinate to the movement of the automobile? What happens when it snows in your city? Once you start seeing the biases built into the concrete, you will never be able to unsee them.
It is an invitation to ask critical questions about the invisible forces shaping our lives. Who is included in this space? Who is deliberately excluded? And what human values are being silently, permanently enforced by the architecture that surrounds us?
And I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over as you navigate your week. We've spent all this time today deeply analyzing how to design a feminist park.
Yeah.
We've talked about how to carve out a specific space of liberation, how to build a plaza in Montevideo, and how to fit it into the existing flawed machinery of the city.
Right.
But based on everything we've learned today, from the brilliant, grounded observations of Jane Jacobs, to the exhausting 4-hour commutes of the care workers in Brussels, to the triumphant 400,000 women marching in the streets of Uruguay, maybe the ultimate goal isn't to build a feminist park inside the city.
I see where you're going with this.
Maybe the goal is to realize that the entire city should be operating as a feminist park.
Exactly.
What would happen if we stopped zoning care into little, manageable boxes? What would happen if we treated every single street, every transit route, every municipal budget, and every neighborhood with the exact same ethics of care, flexibility, and shared freedom that we see in Plaza Las Pioneras?
That is the ultimate paradigm shift. We aren't just talking about designing a new type of park, we are talking about designing a fundamentally new type of world.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into these incredible sources. We hope it has challenged your perspective, inspired your curiosity, and given you a completely new lens through which to view the streets you walk every single day. Keep questioning the concrete, and we'll catch you next time. This knowledge is a tool, really. A tool for seeing your city differently, and potentially for helping to change it.
It's been a really insightful deep dive, I think. This document provides such a vital framework, especially for projects like the Feminist Park Project that are trying to build something fundamentally different. It shows just how interlinked urban design and social justice are.
It really does. But it also shows the scale of the challenge, right? It requires sustained effort, real commitment, and a genuine willingness to shift power dynamics in how cities get made and managed.
Definitely. It makes you think about how we ensure those voices, the ones that have been excluded, are actually heard and centered.
There's another quote from Sarah Ahmed that feels relevant here.
Go on.
She says, "If you have to shout to be heard, you are heard as shouting."
That's powerful.
It makes you ponder, doesn't it? How can the design of public space itself work differently? How can it amplify the voices of those who've been historically silenced, ensuring their needs are met without them having to shout just to be noticed?
How can design itself listen? That's a really provocative thought to end on.
A lot to think about.
Indeed. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.